Welcome to the true North, strong and free. Welcome to the greatest country in the world. Welcome to MMAfighting.com's UFC 165 preview show. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani. This time in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where on Saturday night, Jon Jones will defend his UFC light heavyweight title one more time, this time against Alexander the Mauler Gustafsson. Now, this really kicks off an amazing fourth quarter for the UFC. This event, this card, one of many big ones coming up in the coming months. And to sort of kick everything off, we have brought in a man who will be making his debut on the MMAfighting.com preview show. You know him from the MMA beat. You know him as the man with the hat. You know him as Chuck, don't call me Mindenhall. There he is. A slow reveal.
After that introduction, I'm intimidated. But let's do this. What's up with the P meal in this place? What is P meal?
What does that mean? I'm talking to the mic. Don't be shy.
P meal. What is P meal? I keep
I don't
saying
even know
P
what
meal.
you're talking about.
What's the Canadian thing?
P meal.
P meal.
Well, this is a great debut for Chuck, asking me about something I've never heard of, and I'm from this country. Is it true, though, Chuck, that you've accomplished a lot in your MMA journalism career, but is it true that you have often said that until you appear on the MMAfighting.com preview show, MMA Beat's all well and good, until you appear on this show, it's a little incomplete. True?
That might have been Chuck Mindenhall who said that, but that sounds like something I might have said. Yeah.
Well, it's great to have him here, new member of the team, and of course we're talking about UFC 165 today, Chuck. It's coming up in a matter of hours. Jon Jones looking to break the record as far as light heavyweight title defenses. Right. Tito Ortiz set that record. This is something he really wants, and a lot of the talk going into this fight, as far as the media and fans are concerned, has been about the promotion of the fight. People criticizing the UFC for underselling Alexander Gustafsson, focusing too much on the reach, the height, not about this could be the first Swede UFC champion, this could be the first European champion since Andrei Arlovsky. Do you feel like they kind of dropped the ball in selling us on Alexander Gustafsson?
I don't know if they dropped the ball. It's one of those things, when you look at it, it is sort of novel. Most of the guys that Jon Jones has faced at this point, he's had an extraordinary reach advantage. He's looked a lot taller. Rashad Evans was challenging him. I remember when they were standing up against each other, he just looks imposing and bigger. So it's an interesting thing, especially when you're talking to a wider array of people. You're saying, well, this is the first guy who can look at him in the eye and has 81.2 inch reach.
Supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly. I don't know if they got an official measurement on that, but he has this reach. It makes it a little bit interesting, and it helps that he's a good kickboxer. He knows what he's doing on his feet. You know, if he's able to kind of keep the space, and they want to trade from that range, who knows? I mean, to me, it holds. That's the biggest piece of allure to me is that alone.
Well, let's stick with the promotion topic for a second. You know, just last week, the greatest boxer in the world, Floyd Mayweather, fought. On Saturday, the greatest MMA fighter in the world, most agree right now he's the pound-for-pound king, is fighting. Does this feel like a big deal to you? Do you feel like the MMA community and the sports world recognizes that the best in the world is fighting here on Saturday?
I think that's a growing sense among people who watch MMA. My contention was always that boxing has been around for so long, it's sort of seeped in our nature at this point to know what boxing is. I had a discussion with Luke Thomas about this, and we talked about it on the MMA beat. This boxing is something that's been around. Your great-grandfather knew what boxing was. People who know what boxing is. I feel like Floyd Mayweather, particularly how well he sells his fights, Canelo having the country behind him, sort of being that big intrigue, it's so young. It just had more of an appeal. And this coming on the heels of that, I think it loses a little bit. It's in the shadow a little bit. But Jon Jones, let's face it, he is the best thing we've seen. I think one of the reasons we look at Alexander Gustafsson is, we're talking about, the reach and all this stuff is because what else do you look at when you're fighting a guy like Jon Jones? Nobody's going to look like the favorite against Jon Jones or a challenger to Jon Jones, perhaps until he goes to heavyweight. So at this point, I feel like we're still in the process of sort of unveiling Jon Jones in that bigger sense. But Gatorade's behind him as of this week, and Nike's behind him. I mean, it's starting to take place.
Doesn't it feel like the media is somewhat obsessed in talking about the evolution of Jon Jones? Like, it feels like anytime he does a conference call, an interview, we always have to give him a report card, how he did in front of the media, how his public sort of persona has evolved. Why do you think we are so interested in the way he handles himself? We don't walk away from an interview with George St. Pierre or Frankie Edgar or anyone else and report on how they why
matured
is that?
before our eyes. It's one of those things, look, when he first came into the fight game, he had a couple of fights. He was very quiet, soft-spoken. After he beat Stephan Bonner, I particularly remember him in the post-fight press conference, just sort of standing there and answering the questions, very soft-spoken, very humble about the whole thing. a lot came very fast for him. He was put, you know, in his young 20s, he was put into an acceleration into a title fight, which he took full advantage of after he stopped a robbery from happening. Or
That's right.
So I mean, he was, you know, he had all these things going on. Where he was a Superman, he was all this stuff. It sort of went way up in 2011, then kind of went down in 2012, and a lot of that had to do with Rashad Evans sort of planting out there that he's a phony, he's a fake. There was a lot of things he said in the media that put him in trouble. You know, we tracked his DWI that happened. A lot of the things that happened probably go into defining him as a human being. But I thought what we saw kind of in the press call going into this fight was a guy who seemed very sincere and genuine now, like a guy who's very confident and cocky, and but he blends those very well. He thinks he's going to win. He tells it like it is, and there is nothing phony about what I heard in that conference call. So that's where Jon Jones is in his career. He's kind of grown into his position.
Do you subscribe to the notion that Jon Jones needs a foil? He needs a Chael Sonnen to his Anderson Silva, a Joe Frazier to his Muhammad Ali, a Shawn Michaels to his Bret Hart. Does he need someone to really make him into a star? Because right now he's fighting guys who's just knocking off, and there's no rivalry there. There's no rivalry with Gustafsson. There may not be a rivalry with Glover Teixeira, and until he finds that rival, he may not be a megastar.
It's a tribute to him that it's so hard to find one. I mean, guys like Rashad Evans, he came close by just having the backstory of Greg Jackson's everything, just the back and forth and the bad blood between them, but ultimately the fight was one-sided enough where it didn't matter. He's rendered most of the light heavyweights that we know and talk about, all the past glories, he's sort of rendered a moot at this point. So he's that good, he's that far above and beyond everybody in the division. It's not going to happen against Glover Teixeira. The only guy I could say that might start to present that sort of dynamic on the horizon will be a guy like Daniel Cormier, perhaps, because there's already this bad blood brewing. But ultimately, it's going to have to come down to a guy like Daniel Cormier coming in and either beating him or giving him a challenge that he'll remember, where there's just a call to have a series happen in that fight. But right now, that hasn't existed.
Gustafsson is a massive underdog. Do you give him any kind of chance on Saturday?
It's tough because when you take a look at Gustafsson, if he gets put on his back, I feel like Jones can win this fight anywhere he wants. But if he goes on his back, it's going to be very tough. He does have submissions, but you know, a determined wrestling effort. Like if you look at the guys, like he fought Hamill, he fought Hua, he fought Thiago Silva, he fought a lot of guys who weren't able to really do much with that stuff. But when you look at the determined wrestler, Phil Davis comes to mind in Abu Dhabi, UFC 112. He was the last guy to beat him. You feel like if Jon Jones really wants to make this simple on himself, he'll go in there and take him down and maybe work his ground pound and just out-muscle him, out, you know, everything, and just beat him that way. This is where it gets interesting, though, is the Chael Sonnen thing. We're going into the Chael Sonnen fight. Everybody talked about how's Chael Sonnen going to win. Well, he's going to plant his head into his sternum or his abdomen and just take him down. Well, that's his only chance, right? He's going to be a wrestler. What did Jon Jones do?
Right.
He out-wrestled him. So sometimes Jon Jones gets a little bit of pride in there, so he may want to stand up and prove that he's the better striker in this fight.
Your pick?
I'm going Jon Jones. I think it'll probably come second round and it'll be TKO on the ground.
Wow, all right, well, in the co-main event, Toronto's getting 2 title fights once again, just like last year at UFC 152, this time featuring the interim bantamweight title when champion Renan Barão faces Eddie Wineland. Now, in my opinion, Chuck, the most interesting part of this fight is the Dominic Cruz shadow casting over it. Is it almost like the UFC is doing a disservice to Barão, to even Wineland, who's trying to get this title? He was the first ever WC Bantamweight champion by not making this an official title fight. The interim tag seems to make people less interested in the fight, right?
Well, and the sense of urgency in this sport particularly, it's always one of those things you're like, what do you want to have an interim anything or a placeholder of anything? Right. Because you do have you're basically pointing out that there's a guy out of action who looms over the whole thing, like you mentioned. I feel like it's been a disservice, but it also shows that they really like Dominic Cruz and they think that he was dominant enough during his time there that he deserves that, and he's helped him in other ways. You know, the filling on the show. He's done a lot of stuff. He stayed in the public eye, and I feel like that's part of why they honored him. And the other thing is he was coming back. He worked so hard to come back, and he had that setback after the cadaver didn't take on his ACL and all that stuff. And I feel like it's one of those situations where it just keeps getting exacerbated as we go. And but now they've actually put this February, I'm hearing like February deadline on him. If he can't come back then, I'm guessing they're going to remove that. And that's only fair to a guy like Renan Barão, who's hasn't lost in a decade. I mean, this is a guy that they really could get behind. You know, Nova União trains with Jose Aldo. It's just one of those, he's a guy they should be 100% behind at this point. And so I think it's time if Cruz isn't ready.
This fight was originally supposed to happen at UFC 161 in Winnipeg back in June. Going into that fight, Eddie Wineland was sporting an unbelievable mustache, Rolly Fingers-esque, right?
Right.
And then he shaves it. And you know, and why I bring this up is, of course, this has nothing to do with the fight, but on Wednesday's episode of UFC Tonight, Chael Sonnen said, you know, it's almost like these guys forgot that they have to try to sell this fight. You're in the shadows of not only Dominic, of John Jones as well, and I felt like that, maybe I'm just a nut for facial hair and gimmicks and things like that, but that gave this fight a bit of an edge. He's like the new Eddie Wineland. Shaves it, it just kind of feels vanilla at this point. Do you feel like there's something to that? These guys sometimes go into these big fights, and it's big for them, it's big for what their career is going to be all about, but they also have to sell it a little bit.
Particularly in a fight where John Jones has been in Toronto, this will be his 3rd time defending this belt, and it's to kind of add intrigue for the local fans, if people are going to pay to get through the gate. You think that they would kind of trump up that other title a little bit more. It does seem like it's been downplayed to the point where it's, you know, a little bit lost in this whole thing. But when you really think about that fight and what those guys do, both guys like to stand and bang. Eddie Wineland, you know, like Eddie Wineland, he's not getting a lot of respect in this fight, but you know, you've seen what he's able to do just kind of leading up here, and he's hard to finish. I think it was like 4 years ago last time he was finished, and that was against Ronnie Yaya at WC 40. And he's fought a lot of good guys. Joseph Benavidez, Uriah Faber. He's very hard to put away. So you feel like if he fights his fight, in which why wouldn't you lay it all on the line? That's going to be a really good war, because Renan Barão doesn't fight in a boring fight. So to me, they could have put a little bit more legs behind it and made it into something more. But I think at the end of it, we'll be talking about it more than we were going in.
That's very interesting. Okay, you're picking why?
I'm going to go with Renan Barão by controlled maelstrom. No, I'm going to. No, I think that I just think he's too much, man. He's a black belt on the ground, you know, but he doesn't. He uses that as a fallback. He's such a good striker, so fast. I think that he's going to create the space, use his length. He's going to pick him apart. I can't get things like him kicking kneeing Brad Pickett, putting him down, or kicking the legs out of Uriah Faber. Just how his array of striking is just so far superior to anybody that's coming up, and that includes Eddie Wineland. So I'm taking him probably by TKO. We'll say 3rd round.
Finishes Eddie Wineland. That's very interesting. Now, the other featured fight on the card pits heavyweights Matt Mitrione and Brendan Schaub. Of course, they were cast members on the 10th season of The Ultimate Fighter a few years back, and some have questioned, there's been some interesting hype leading into this fight, but some have questioned the authenticity of it. Some have said maybe they have this gentleman's agreement to build up the fight, because they put out this amazing video, but there are people who aren't too sure about it. What do you think? Was that video, the trash talk, all that stuff, is that good, or do you see right through it?
I think they're better football players and fighters than they are thespians. But I will say that I think it's genuine. I believe that there's some genuine blood. These guys are supposed to fight, a while ago in Seattle. You have a guy in your crosshairs from either side of it that long, it's bound to start getting to your mind, and it does things to a man, Ariel, to have that guy like that. So I think that ultimately what you're starting to see is those guys. One person says one thing, the Adam Sandler, all that whole Twitter thing. I mean, it starts to take off, and if it's a ruse, it's a pretty good one, honestly. And ultimately, who cares in the end? Because ultimately, these guys, somebody's probably going to get knocked out. That's my opinion on this. They both came in. They were the Tough 10, one of the better shows we've seen in that franchise history with Kimbo Slice and everything. They were friends on that. They kind of banded together, the backstory and all that. But ultimately, they're about the same place in their MMA careers. They both had a couple of setbacks. They both rebounded with wins. Now it becomes which guy continues to go forward, and now which guy sort of gets pushed back further. And I can tell you what I think about that.
Please. That was my next question. Thank you.
I'm going to go. I still think that Schaub training with Tim Tebow at one point, but I think Schaub finds
that's the difference maker.
That's the difference maker from the 2012 training. But I think that ultimately he'll find his chin probably early in the. I can't get the Ben Rothwell fight out of my mind. I think that Schaub takes a big punch, and that's that. Matt Mitrione wins.
Wow. You kind of threw me for a loop there.
I started to say that backwards, but Mitrione.
Funny, though, Schaub is saying that he'll teach him the difference between a ex-NFL player and a martial artist when he is exactly that.
Right. Well,
I like that line. The irony is rich.
Yeah. Did you see his Did you see the Okay. I just want to make sure the Metamoris thing was mentioned.
All right, let's touch on 2 more fights before we go. Of course, middleweights are in action. Francis Carmon of Montreal, very close by, against Costa Philippou. Costa Philippou's streaking in the middleweight division. Who are you picking?
I'm going with Philippou on this. I think that he's able to create more, and he has the heavier hands. And I think it's weird with Francis Carmon. Like I think we had him out of the gate. He was going to be this guy. He's training up with TriStar, with Faraz Zahabi, all GSP. We had a lot of radar mentions for him. His last couple fights have been very close. One of them he arguably lost against Tom Lawler. I think that people are starting to figure him out a little bit. I think Philippou will switch camps. That's a big question mark.
Yep.
But I think he gets it done. And I can't foresee it any other way than maybe him knocking him out, because I feel like they're going to stand and trade, especially with Carmon coming off of that last fight against Lorenz Larkin was left a lot to the imagination.
I always like to pick a people's main event on every card. The one that the hardcores and the true fans are excited about. I think Pat Healy versus Khabib Nurmagomedov is that fight. Who are you picking?
I'm going with Khabib. I don't want to pronounce his last name because I always put the emphasis on the wrong. But I'm going with Khabib because it's a weird thing. Both those guys are coming off maybe the biggest wins of their career, but they both have this taint sort of on them from Khabib coming in overweight, and he sort of seemed feckless in that whole thing. Like it didn't seem to bother him too much that he came in overweight. But 21 takedowns against Abel Trujillo, and he looked fantastic in that fight. He's undefeated. I think he's the younger. He turns 26 years old, I think, today.
It's his birthday today?
The 20th, Friday. Yeah, Friday.
Look at Chuck.
So,
knowledge.
So he's going to, I think it's just going to be him. Pat Healy, of course, he comes off that biggest fight of his career, dominates an indomitable guy like Jim Miller for 3 rounds, makes all this money, has it taken away. And he is probably the most underrated guy on the roster. That's just saying that, but I still think Khabib gets it done. It's a bad matchup for him in the end.
I've been calling Chuck the people's champion of MMAfighting.com. The people seem to love this guy. And then he drops Khabib's birthday, threw me for a loop. I don't think anyone's ever dropped a birthday on us on the preview show. I think that just sealed that.
I'll be jumping out of his cake later. Are you kidding? That's the reason
You'll at least be invited back for one more. I was questioning it before the birthday knowledge, but you did a fine job.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you get to knock it off your bucket list.
Yes, I'm glad too. Maybe next time they can turn down the temperature. I'm sweating like a warthog.
Well, UFC 165 just hours away now. It goes down at the Air Canada Centre right here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Remember, the prelims on Fox Sports 1. Pay-per-view kicks off at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 in the West, and of course, MMAfighting.com will have our usual coverage for you on Fight Night. We are just hours away from John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. For Chuck Mindenhall, I'm Ariel Helwani. We will see you on Saturday night.